Welcome back. You're listening to Get Real with Bob and Stacy. You're joining us for our Leaders and Legends segment. Our first guest today is Joann Lublin, management news editor for the Wall Street Journal and author of Earning It, Hard-Won Lessons from Trailblazing Women at the Top of the Business World. Welcome to the show, Joann.
Thanks for having me.
I want to give everybody some background on Joann. She is management news editor for the Wall Street Journal. She works with reporters in the U.S. and abroad to conceptualize and organize coverage of management and workplace issues. She covers issues such as corporate governance, executive compensation, recruiting, and succession, and writes stories on these topics mainly for the journal's front page and marketplace section. She assumed her duties in December 2002. She is also author of a new book called Earning It, Hard-Won Lessons from Trailblazing Women at the Top of the Business World. It describes leadership lessons from 52 high-level female corporate executives based on career obstacles they overcame. Nearly two-thirds of the women interviewed are experienced public company CEOs. Ms. Lublin long served as contributing editor of the journal's annual special section on executive pay and still helps coordinate coverage of its yearly CEO pay survey. She previously oversaw the weekly career journal pages and was responsible for career coverage. Before I start asking questions, make sure you check out her website at Joann, Joann, Lublin, Lublin.com. So, first of all, my big question for you is, what made you decide to write the book?
A couple things. I wanted to give back to our daughter, who was entering the workforce and not really that much aware of what had come before her in terms of the kinds of issues women had to deal with. I did a first-person essay aimed at our daughter for a Wall Street Journal blog back in 2008. And it was called Remember the Barriers. It described some of my early experiences as a journalist. And I got a lot of very interesting reaction to that essay. And at the same time, I've been writing about management issues for over a quarter of a century for the Wall Street Journal. And I had met, not a lot, but some pretty impressive high-ranking corporate executive women. So it was the combination of that essay that I wrote for her daughter and being curious as to whether other women had gotten into much higher level positions in corporate America than me, had also dealt with and overcame career obstacles of one kind or another and become better leaders.
Wow, that's awesome. So what do you think is one of the more powerful leadership lessons that you share in the book?
Well, given that a number of the women that I write about in the book had setbacks, not just professional but personal, and not just related to their gender, to me, the most important and common leadership trait that these women exhibited was resiliency. They were able to deal with life's misfortunes or their jobs' setbacks and figure out a way to learn from that obstacle or that setback and become a better person or a better leader as a result. Or they figured out ways around the obstacles. So this ability to bounce back struck me as really important and pretty common.
Wow. Take a punch. That's what you have to do.
Yeah.
So you talk about in the book through the interviews, there are all different types of strategies for women for winning a management post. Can you talk about any of those strategies?
Well, I think one of the more interesting one, and that seems to have resonance with a lot of people who have read the book, is when you're early in your career and are trying to get your very first management role, your very first supervisory role. And the theme of that particular chapter was called Bloom Where You're Planted. And the notion is to not necessarily be upset if the job you really were hoping to get is not the one you get when it's your first important move up into a managerial role. Because you know what? It might be instead an opportunity to really show what you can do. And the example that I deal with in the book involves Andrea Jung, who later becomes the very first woman chief executive of Avon Products. And in her case, she wanted to get promoted into one particular kind of supervisory role at a very big department store that we've all known called Bloomingdale's, where she had been a buyer. And she didn't get it, and instead was asked to do something totally different and a job that she really didn't want. And of course, she did wonderfully at it.
Right.
And so what she says in the book is that taking a different position than the one you really want, she said, quote, can end up being the very best thing that happens to you. And, what looks like a setback then can become a very integral part of becoming a better leader.
I'm curious about, only because I've experienced this in the Boston corporate market and networking. I still feel that there is a good old boys network, that there are many high-level, top-ranking men executives who support and promote each other. Through your interviews, do you find that there's also a similar type of female network?
Yeah, it's called the sisterhood.
Love it.
And that became very, very apparent when I talked to some of these women who have gone on to become corporate board members. And when they then get in the boardroom, whether they are current or a former executive at that point in their careers, they become hugely outspoken advocates for getting more women into senior management at the company whose board they're on, and more importantly, or equally importantly, making sure that those women are paid equitably, paid comparably to the men whose level they are being promoted to. And often they're doing this without the individual executive woman being aware of it. Another thing that a number of these women were doing and are still doing is they're acting as door openers to recommend women for corporate board seats. Because, again, there's a relatively small percentage of women serving on major public company boards, and they tend to ask the same women over and over. And I talk at the back of that chapter, called Beating Board Bias, that the ultimate secret weapon may be women like this, who themselves are already on more boards than they can possibly take, and so they act as personal advocates on behalf of other women who want to be a director for the first time and who they know are qualified and that they can personally vouch for.
I love that. So I know you talk in the book about when it comes to pay negotiations in corporate America, you talk about a velvet glove. What is a velvet glove, and what does that mean for women?
And that concept of velvet glove is one that is a really cool one because it applies not just to pay negotiations. Because I get asked a lot about, why is it then when men are, pretty assertive, they are praised as leaders, and when women are assertive, they are seen as pushy. And so the velvet glove concept is the notion that when you are negotiating on your behalf to either get a good pay package when you're hired or to get a better pay package when you're being promoted, is you do so from a position of strength. You figure out what it is that those who have had this job before made, those who are in similar positions are making. You're asking smart questions. You're going in completely prepared for the negotiation. So that's the sort of fist inside the glove. The velvet part is you're showing empathy for the other side, the person who's negotiating and you understand is working within some budgetary constraints.
Okay, great stuff. For anybody just tuning in, we are talking to Joann Lublin. She recently authored a book called Earning It, Hard-Won Lessons from Trailblazing Women at the Top of the Business World. By the way, when it came to vetting the people that you were writing about, how many people did you interview? How did you select them?
Well, I interviewed 52 high-ranking women, of whom nearly, as you mentioned earlier, nearly two-thirds are experienced public company chief executives. These are women like Mary Barra, the chief executive of General Motors, Ginny Rometty, who's the CEO of IBM, and a number of well-known people. Anne Mulcahy's the first woman CEO of Xerox, Denise Morrison, the CEO of Campbell Soup, and she and her sister, Maggie Wilderotter, who's the former CEO of Frontier Communications, are still, as of this date, the only sisters to have become CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. I got turned down by a number of women. I probably got turned down by about 15 or 20 women. Some cases it was because they were too busy, their current CEOs. In other cases, they didn't want to be pigeonholed as a female fill in the blank.
Right.
And
That's
totally
interesting.
understandable.
Huh.
I reached out to women who I'd already known, as I said, through covering management issues for a long time, women I had previously written about, or in some cases, women who had written books about their own lives who I thought, therefore, would be open to sharing additional insights with me.
Wow. So did you find that, first of all, in speaking to the 52 women, do you find that there is sexual harassment that still exists? And
Absolutely.
Did they have any advice for avoiding sexual harassment conflicts within the workplace?
I devote an entire chapter to that topic. It's called Sexual Harassment Never Vanish. And I continue to hear stories about it still going on as I go around the country talking about the book. And some of these women who themselves experience sexual harassment early in their careers, then when they get into positions of power, make it their personal responsibility to make sure it doesn't happen or it's corrected quickly when it's going on with women in their 20s who are working for them. And yet, at the end of that chapter and every core chapter of the book, I list key leadership lessons. And I've been asked about some of the tips I put at the end of that chapter. So, for instance, one of the tips at the end of the harassment chapter says, avoid office parties with heavy drinking, late business dinners, or other potentially risky venues. Excuse me, and I quote one of the 52 women saying, make sure you're not sending any signals that could be misinterpreted. So one of the radio shows I've been interviewed for, the interviewer said, I noticed that you put the responsibility on the women, the potential victims here. How much longer will it be before the onus is no longer on us as the women to avoid being harassed, as opposed to the onus being on the men, who for the most part are the harassers, which I thought was a really good question.
That is so interesting. And I know that you talk in the book, too, about how it seems some women, their careers progress because they take on an impossible assignment within the workplace. And that's like a double-edged sword. If you take on something that seems impossible, the good thing is if you accomplish it, you can get promoted right up the career ladder. But it also seems like it could be extremely detrimental if you can't complete the impossible mission.
That is totally true, and that's why there's a major theme in the book around the notion of, sure, you definitely got to be raising your hands for the Mission Impossible assignments, and these are the tasks that nobody wants to take. But you've got to make sure it's a calculated risk. You've got to weigh the upsides and downsides. You have to know what your would-be boss is expecting of you. What are going to be the benchmarks by which you're measured? And you also have to make sure that you're protected if it doesn't work out. There's a great story in the book involving Ellen Kullman, the former CEO of DuPont, who at one point, midway through her career there, she's highly successful at DuPont. She's asked to start an entirely new business for DuPont. They'd never, ever done this before. Safety consulting. And she's not given very specific marching orders. There's no promise of a budget, no promise of staffing, no promise of anything other than, this is something that's important for DuPont. And she decides to take it because she makes sure she gets a get-out-of-jail-free card. She persuades the CEO, and he does this, that if things don't work out after 6 months, that she will get a transferred to a comparable job to the one she gave up. And the one she gives up is running a huge business unit at DuPont with billions of dollars in revenues and 2,000 employees.
Wow.
And by the way, she makes it a flaming success, of course.
Right.
And then, during the 4 years she's running this new business, it has a compound annual growth rate of 15%.
Wow.
She's then asked to build another new division, and then in 2009 she takes over as CEO.
Wow.
That's impressive.
Yes. Did you find any women that spoke of, sometimes I feel like, at least in Boston, in the business world, sometimes women are not so friendly to each other. And it seems like sometimes you have to go through men if you want to advance on the career front.
Well, I think at the end of the day, given the current state of play in corporate America, whether women are friendly to you or not, you still need men, and you need men probably
Correct.
more than you need women. And you need men to be your corporate sponsors. You need women to be your corporate sponsors too. But a sponsor is somebody who is going to put their professional reputation on the line on your behalf because they believe in you and because you've done things for them that prove that you're helping support their own advancement. And so, there always are going to be workplaces where women don't support women. There are workplaces where men don't support men. It's an individual thing that is part of life in the world of work. But the point is to look for advocates and look for ways to neutralize your opponents. And again, that's a major theme in the book. There are many of these women in this book who end up supervising men who've never had a female boss or never had a female boss they liked, and essentially say, I'm not going to work for you. So how do you deal with that?
Right.
And so those are issues that we all have to work through, and there's a lot of advice about that in the book.
Wow. And last question for you, because we need to wrap up. I'm not even in corporate America. I own a business and I'm an entrepreneur, but I find that it seems like the lessons apply to any female trying to get anywhere in business or life. So is it just aimed at corporate America or any female?
And it's not just aimed at women either, because like I said, when I started out, I thought the main focus of the book was going to be on gender bias and how they had overcome that and become better leaders. But it became really clear pretty early that the women I talked to were experiencing the same things that men experience who are trying to advance in their careers.
Right.
Didn't get the job they wanted straight out of school, didn't get the promotion they wanted, got fired when they thought they were doing a good job,
right.
Didn't get along with certain people, didn't get people to cooperate. And so at the end of the day, it really is a leadership book that applies to men and women, but more so obviously to women, and more so to women early and midway through their careers, both who have worked at large companies and at smaller companies, because I did interview a couple of entrepreneurs, and then there were people like Ellen Coleman who were, in effect, an intrapreneur.
Right.
She had to start a business from scratch, albeit within the confines of a larger company.
Wow. Great stuff. Exciting book. Again, this is Joann Lublin, and her book is Earning It, Hard-Won Lessons from Trailblazing Women at the Top of the Business World. You can find Joann at her website, Joann, Joann, Lublin, Lublin.com. Thank you so much for joining us today, Joann.
You're welcome.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Get Real after this.